Another beautiful instrument with scroll. A Duff.
Built by Paul Duff of Australia. And basically a very faithful copy of a 23 lore. Darn close anyway, some departures here and there, but largely inspired by the Lohr era instruments manufactured by Gibson under Guy Hart and Lloyd Lohr. And this one happens to feature a Viersy in it. The Viersy tone producer being something that, well, you can't see it, but you can certainly hear it. More context would help, perhaps. But the Viersy is a roughly circular-shaped spruce disc that sits mounted with 3 small spruce feet to the underside of the top, and is designed, among other things, to eliminate harsh overtones and to thicken the instrument's voice, if you will. It's sort of hard to describe, and I can't say I fully understand the physics behind it, but I know I love how it sounds.
Now, Viersy, as I understand it, came from the world of violin making originally.
That's right.
The Viersy brothers.
Of Brooklyn, I do believe, yeah. About whom I know nothing. And I don't know how much the world still knows about the Viersys, aside from what's left behind in the way of the Viersy tone producer.
Now, the neck that we're seeing here, is this typical of the 23 lore that you're talking about in terms of the binding and this little scallop here down by the...
Well, that's an interesting departure from tradition. Paul has borrowed that particular detail from the F-4, and I just happen to like it. I think it looks great on the instrument. What inspired that choice on his part, I don't know. So the fingerboard could be said not to be typical of the 23 lore. Right. But it's a minor variation, and it certainly suits the instrument, I think.
The Sam Bush would cut it off right about here.
Sure, and Chris Thiele would extend it to about here. But it's an absolutely lovely instrument, and
I love the finish. I love that color.
Well, here, let's see if we can show off some of its details. The back, a truly lovely piece of figured maple. 2, actually. Beautiful figure in the neck. Paul is known for his really wonderful material selection, great attention to detail. I like how he engraves his tailpiece covers.
That's beautiful as well. Now the maple, typically, most mandolins, if not all mandolins, have the maple back at least. And the reason being that that's a relatively hard wood, and you're going to get some response off of that hard wood. Now, it also happens to be a wood that's in a lot of abundance. Is it a combination of those 2 factors that have luthiers use maple, or is there a better wood out there perhaps if it's just not as accessible? Or
if there's a better wood, I'm unaware of it. Sure, there could be. So much of this stems from violin tradition, and violins traditionally are maple back, maple sides, spruce top. Certainly there are any number of instruments out there with koa back and sides. I can't say I've seen a Brazilian back and sides F-5 style instrument, but no reason why it wouldn't exist.
Right.
Each, I suppose, would have different tonal properties, but you know, there is so much tradition involved in these instruments. I think that for the most part, people expect to see maple back and sides and a spruce top. Though there are examples of departures among these, and there are varying reasons for them. Maple is so abundant that for us here in Vermont, for instance, it's a great choice. It exists in abundance in a very high quality, it's wonderful tone wood.
Right.
It is interesting that it's become sort of ubiquitous with the instrument. It's what you expect to see. Mm-hmm. There it is. But that's not to say it's the only choice.
Right. Now the top, in terms of the spruce, the word for a lot of the old vintage instruments was that you had to have a pre-World War II instrument because the spruce was German spruce. And the German spruce had some special quality to it that was that supply was completely depleted after the war and is no longer available. Is there any truth to that, or what are your feelings about that?
Well, I'm neither an historian nor a dyed-in-the-wool traditionalist, so I'm not particularly drawn to vintage instruments because of the material. I love the design, I love the sound. What I would say I've observed over many years is that superb instruments of the day are certainly as good as superb instruments of the turn of the century and the early part of the century when those that are considered to be the standard were being built. Certainly there are many people who would say that you cannot surpass a Lohr F-5 or perhaps a Fern, both instruments being built in the 20s.
Of course, only time will tell.
Only time will tell, but I think that one of the things that stands as a counter-argument to the materials and the age is the work being done by some of these luthiers, Paul Duff included. It would be a stretch to compare this to a Lohr or a Fern and to say the other were significantly superior.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't do that. Maybe some highly critical ear could do so. But I guess the point, certainly, of what we're doing, in a sense, is to highlight the fact that the work being done today is of extraordinary quality and stands on its own merits alongside the extraordinary work that was done in the teens and the 20s. I suppose in a perfect world we'd all love to have wonderful vintage instruments, but the reality is they're increasingly rare and increasingly expensive. And so frequently you have to look to modern choices, and the marvelous thing, which didn't always happen to be the case, is that there are choices that will allow you a really marvelous instrument that will compare so favorably with the extraordinary vintage instruments that are made of those materials you can't get anymore.
Right.
Is there a quantifiable difference? It's not for me to say.
Right.
I know that the modern instruments are simply extraordinary and meet my needs as a player. And I think that that's true for many players. And certainly there are some who are going to say, it's got to be a 25 Fern or a 23 Lohr to meet my criteria. And that's perfectly fair.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that there is so much choice that as a player, people who are looking for instruments, they are doing it at the best possible time in terms of the choices they have in front of them, these being some of them.
That's right. And besides the quality of the materials being made, you could have a mandolin that was an exact duplicate of this mandolin, materials made at the same time and everything. And in my mind, mandolins are a little bit like human beings. No matter if they all have the same properties, they sound a little bit different. They
That's
all
right.
behave a little bit different. They all have their own voice. They all have their own personality. So
That's very true, and you'll find, I think, that a brand new instrument like this stuff is less than 3 months old. It has marvelous character, all of its own. Obviously, it's beautifully made. It has a wonderful, wonderful voice, which conceivably is going to simply develop and become enriched as the years go along. It's got all of what it needs, it seems to me.
well, let's hear it. Yes, it is getting rather close to St. Patrick's Day.